Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Conway Report wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget you can read my work on ESPN.com. I'll have a story up later this week about the Commanders offseason and kind of what it means for the roster, what was revealed, I guess, during their free agency. So check that out on ESPN.com. Today, I'm joined by former Washington Redskin tight end Logan Paulsen, who of course is now an analyst for the Commanders. He also does the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman from the Team 980. So you can check that out. You can check out Logan's work with the team, with the Command Center, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to have him on just to talk about the Commanders' free agency period, the defensive line, how he views that line, just his thoughts on some of those signings, plus the offensive line as well. So one little note for you, the owners' meetings do start I'll be going down there Sunday. I'll be down there Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We'll be talking to Dan Quinn at the coach's breakfast on Tuesday, hopefully having a chat with Adam Peters as well, kind of get some insight into their free agency decision. So just want to let you know, I will have stuff on that. Also on Monday, I will be playing an interview I had with Ryan Porter, who of course works with Jaden Daniels. That's his quarterback's coach, has been with them for more than 10 years, 12, probably about since he was like 11 years old. So it's more than 10 years. Anyway, some good insight into what they're going to work on this offseason and also into Jaden's personality as well. So anyways, without further ado, here's my conversation with Logan Paulsen. All right, Logan, let's get into some X and O talk with this new defensive line. I want to ask about the offensive line too, but let's start with the defensive line and how you see this group after now. This is who they've added. Now, whether or not they get someone in the draft, we'll get into that in a minute, but this is who they've added. How do you assess this group now, and what are some of your early takeaways with them?
Yeah, I think I like what they've done in terms of free agent additions, and I think I like them not because they're the flashiest football players of all time, but because they're just good high floor football players. Like I look at Dietrich Wise as kind of an archetype. I think a lot of fans maybe are not familiar with him, but he's been one of my more favorite players to watch over the last couple of years because he just gets it right. He's pretty good against the run. I think he understands how to use his length. He's got a little bit of pass rush feel, but is going to do what he's supposed to do and is a professional, like in terms of responsibility, assignment, alignment, technique. And I think, Jonathan Jones is kind of the same way. And then you look at Goldman. I played with him when I was in Chicago, obviously. And he was a guy that I thought did a great job at playing that true nose. And when you watch him in Atlanta last year, again, he's lost a little off the fastball, but a guy who understands how to eat double teams, take on blocks, and I think just really raises the floor of the team in terms of run defense. You re-sign Cleveland Farrell. That's kind of one of his areas of strength. Also, he's a bigger kind of edge-setting player who plays extremely physical, and I think that's fantastic. And at Holmes, you re-sign him. Again, I thought that was one of his strengths last year, coming in when he did and being able to kind of establish this physical presence in the front. So I do think having those four edge players in a rotation kind of dictates a vision for the defensive line. We can be in a 4-down front. I think all those guys could play 4 technique if they had to. So you get an odd spacing front if you wanted to. But I like the idea of getting guys who are good at stopping the run, have stopped the run in their career, and have a body size and a body type that lends itself to that responsibility. And especially when you look at the division we're in with teams that want to run the football, specifically Philadelphia, I think getting those types of bodies on first and second down specifically is important.
And, it's funny you say it too, because the other thing is there's a ton of experience that they brought on.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the 4 guys, the 4 newcomers all have a lot of experience. So if nothing else, like the depth of your rotation is just stronger because of that. It feels like, and you're going to have, like, I know in talking to some people there, like they're going to have some intense competition for a couple of those spots that they would not have had last year.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We haven't even talked about Javon Kinlaw either. Right. I think just the addition across the board and talking about guys that I think are all pretty solid football players and knowing that some of them aren't going to make the football team. I think that's another thing that you want. I know that sounds a little bit maybe, I don't know, kind of harsh, but I think that's part of it. That's part of constructing a good roster. Even Jacob Martin, he doesn't fit the same mold that those other guys do, but having a guy that has some pass rush ability, has that kind of bend and hand feel that is important for rushing the passer. I think it's another nice variable to add in terms of rotation and depth. And, like, may the best man win. And ultimately, that's what you want to be doing heading into the draft and heading into training camp, heading into the offseason program, is just having good football players and knowing that one of them won't make the team. But I also think it's good to note that with the practice squad structured the way it is, you might be able to keep some of those guys and have a really nice, kind of stable of athletes to pull from and kind of be able to build out a strong physical culture and keep that culture built on the practice squad. And then if there's an injury, you can bump that guy up to active roster, which I think is another advantage of the new of having so many talented people here at this point of the season.
So you brought up the physical, just being able to be more physical. Like, I'm a bit like, it's funny you talk about Deatrich Wise. I really like him as well. And, it's not a guy that I've paid attention to a lot over the years, but when they signed him, going back and watch him, like, I liked the way he played.
Yeah.
But did you feel like maybe there wasn't as much physicality up front over the course of a season, just with the rotation in general?
I mean, I think they've definitely changed the kind of body type and the priority of body type that they're looking for. Obviously, going from Dante Fowler to Derek Wise or Cleveland Farrell or Holmes or whoever ends up starting in that role. I mean, those are four big body. And I that's by any NFL team, right? All those guys are, above 270 pounds. Like, those are big body, heavy handed, almost looking more like defensive tackle body types, but they're good at what they do. They set edges, they're in their gaps. And so to me, maybe, I don't know if it's a physicality thing. I do think they all bring a tremendous physical presence, but I do think it's guys who, again, when you watch the film, they understand how important it is to be assignment sound and run fits, and I think that's more what I would lean to in that situation. Even Goldman, like having a guy in there that is probably not going to start. I don't know if he makes the team, but a guy that from a rotational standpoint can do some of the stuff that they didn't have a body type to do last year, I think is really, really smart. Finding a true nose guard, a true shade, someone who can, again, sit a double team, penetrate. He's got a little bit of athletic upside and juice. And again, understands the dark arts of what it means to be a good run defender at the NFL. Keep Bobby Wagner clean. I think you've got a bunch of guys now that can do that, which is, as a fan of the team last year, I think one of the more frustrating things watching was like, they're playing hard, they're playing physically, they play with this Commanders mindset, but at times, like, can they win the physical battle up front? And that was always the question with guys that I think are really good football players, and like Sheldon Day and Drazon Newton and guys like that. But now we've got a guy whose fastball is stopping the run. So now we can put him in there, and then we can say, Drazon, come in on third down, or Drazon, play a 5 technique, or Drazon, do something different. And now we can maximize skill sets in a way that I don't think they were quite able to last year because of depth and health issues on the defensive line. But I think that's why I'm so excited about the new look of the group.
And I think to that point, and that's been I've kind of hammered that home, that I just think there's more versatility with this group. And it speaks to what you're saying. And maybe like lack of physicality is the wrong way, because all those guys are going to be physical up front. Right. It's just a matter of how can you withstand what you're facing, right? But it does seem like there's more versatility with this group. And I was talking to a longtime defensive coach the other day about that. And the ability to go from maybe have the same personnel, but go from a 4-3 to a 3-4 or whatever it is. And just how confused, and not just do that, but maybe do it at a certain level.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think when you look at, again, Wise, we've talked about him a lot, and even Holmes, right? They both have played 6 technique, which is like a true defensive end, 5 technique, which is true defensive end. They've also played 4-eye. They've also played 3 technique at times. And so when you've got these bodies that add flexibility to the front, we can be in even personnel. So like, your traditional, 4 defensive linemen, but we can be in odd spacing with Frankie Louvu on the ball and just kick the front over. And then Wise or Goldman can be, Wise can be a 4-eye, Goldman can be a nose, and then Drazon or Duran can be the other 4-eye, and then Cleveland Farrell can be the other stand-up defensive end. And we're in 4-down personnel with Frankie on the ball, but we're in a different front spacing. And I'm not saying they're going to do that, but they can do that now because they've got guys who have done it and have done it well. And I think that I haven't talked to anybody over there about their vision for the defense, but I do think that is something that's in the bag now. And I think last year when you look at what they did that a little bit, but now maybe they do it more because they feel more comfortable with the personnel and those new roles and those new positions in terms of spacing on the defensive line.
And Dan Quinn, I can just getting to know him a little bit, likes that versatility and the competition and all that. But it also, it's funny because there's two things with that. One, again, when I was talking to this coach, is like it just makes it harder for a team to prepare. Not, if you have, like during practice, for the example, the week leading up to practice, if you're facing a team that maybe has some of that versatility and to do what you say they might be able to do, how much does that impact preparations leading into the game for another offense?
I mean, it's tremendously difficult. I think back to my times playing in teams that played multiple fronts. Like you, as a player, have to do a lot of mental gymnastics. So let's say I've got 10 runs in, right? Versus a team that plays kind of base 4 down spacing. Like I just need to know how this run is blocked versus 4 down spacing, whether I'm to the open side or to the closed side. They're going to be in approximately the same spacing every time. But now, like even looking at last year, the Commanders played an underfront with a 5 technique and a shade and a Sam on the ball. That's different blocking rules, right? They're in an odd front with a true nose and a 4-eye and a Sam on the ball, right? That's different blocking rules, right? They're in a straight over front with a 3 technique and a 6. That's different rules for me that I have to know, right? And so they played all kind of the traditional 4 down, the traditional like 4 spacings that you get, the odd, the even, the over, the under, all that kind of stuff. And so I look at that and I say, like, if we have 10 runs now, I need to know 40 basically versions of each. So 40 total plays. Mm-hmm. So in terms of adding volume, and then that doesn't even get into protection rules. So the more variety you can bring in, it just really impacts the amount of preparation that the opposing team has to do for you. Now you need to own it. You need to master it so that you're in the right position. You can execute at a high level. But when you play teams that do a bunch of different stuff, I think back to the Baltimore Ravens, in the early stages of my career, like 2010, 2011, even the Dallas Cowboys when Wade Phillips was there, and they'd kind of do all these kind of funky different spacings with odd personnel. Like you had to know, you had to communicate that you and the tackle had to be on the same page, and that's just on a first down run. And you don't want to be spending that much time equity on first down runs. You want to be able to throw the football, find your shot plays. So I think it's tremendously important, and it provides a huge advantage, obviously, if the guys can mentally handle it and execute it at a high level and own it, because you don't want to be throwing a bunch of stuff out there and then they can't do it. But I do think it gives them it makes it challenging for opposing offenses for sure.
And it's funny because you're right. Like, I don't want to overstate it because we know that they'd like to do this. We don't know how effective it's going to be. And you have to do it effective. You can't just line up in different fronts and think it's going to be okay. But from a defensive perspective too, Logan, when you're able, like, there are different style of runs that maybe you can take away by using the same personnel, but in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, like offensively, if we want to attack the weak side bubble, right? But like you're going to come out in odd spacing, there is no weak side bubble anymore, right? Like, let's say we want to be a Wanda team. So, single back, run away from the tight end to the open side to the tackle where there's no tight end, right? To that open edge of the offense. And we want to attack the bubble because they normally play an over front. But now we get in we can get in an under front and move the 3 technique to the other side, or we can get an odd spacing and have a 4-eye over there. Like, now all of a sudden our game plan doesn't work. The thing we wanted to do is no longer viable because that open side run is less effective versus those run spaces versus those defensive spacing. So I think it could be a huge chess piece. But again, like, for all the mental gymnastics the offense has to go through, the defense also has to understand that every time I change the spacing of the front, my run fit changes, not only for the linebackers, but for the secondary players, especially if you're playing a little bit of quarters coverage. So I think that's all stuff to kind of keep in mind when we talk about variety and flexibility, because ultimately, like, while you can dictate to the offense a certain extent what you're doing defensively, you have to be able to react to what they do from a personnel and a formation standpoint defensively. So, and you have to know all the adjustments off of that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how far they delve into that bag. And I can't wait to see, in OTAs and stuff, like what that looks like.
Right. And again, I always stress, because we don't want to overstate things, but I do think this group gives them more ability to change things than they had last year for sure.
Sure.
And what about Kinlaw? Like, how do you see him, and what were your, because he was the guy that everybody has probably talked about the most up front, 3-year deal, et cetera.
Yeah, I think Kinlaw is really interesting because I think when you watch him in San Francisco, I think he leaves a lot to be desired. Then you watch him with the New York Jets, and I think you see a player who's getting better. And then I kind of said, like, what are they looking at? Like, what's the thing that makes him special? What's his superpower? Because Dan Quinn talks about it all the time. And I think he's just an explosive playmaker who's 6'6" and almost 330 pounds. Like, when he is at his best, penetrating gaps, attacking in the backfield, he can be tremendously disruptive. He can rush with tremendous power. He's not great on first and second downs in terms of feeling double teams, but if you can get him as a 3 technique or a 4-eye on an isolation block, he can kill the dude in front of him, right? He's not great at like block recognition. Like that's on his game. Like to me, like Goldman is much better at that. But the explosive burst and his ability to generate negative plays for the offense. So TFLs, sacks, pressures, I think his potential for that is extremely high. And I also think like, they know him really well. Adam Peters knows him really well. Dan Quinn knows the coaching staff up in New York extremely well. Like they know exactly what he is. And I think, again, I go back to what Dan Quinn's superpower is his ability to identify what players do well and put them in the best position to be successful. So I look at that and I say, like, if you can get him going forward fast and not having to think too much about run fits and schemes and playing blocks in certain ways and just let him go, let the dog off the leash, I think he could be a really dynamic, disruptive piece on the interior, especially complementing the guys they already have there in Deron Payne and Drazon Newton.
And it's funny because I think I heard you talking with Craig on the Take Command podcast about his last 3 games last year.
Yes.
And things that you saw. So this morning, to prep for this, I went back and I was able to watch 2 of the games, not all 3, but 2. And, so some of the things that you see there are some of the stuff that you saw, but I also noticed, first of all, really effective on stunts.
Yes.
And I felt like that, but also there is that when he's able to sink his hips and explode, he really plays with some power. And then you'd see other times where against the run, the double teams he will turn his back, he'll get out of whack there. But if you can lessen those type of situations and put him in these situations, then it has a better chance to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting, I saw this on Twitter, someone sent it to me, and I think maybe you and I talked about it at some point too, but like the idea of him playing a crash 5 or like a 6 technique. So on the open side edge, like just him and the tackle one-on-one. Like I think that would be an excellent spot for him because there's only 2 options that can happen there. You get a down block and then you're spilling the pulling guard or you're spilling the tight end, like with violence, which he is great at, or you're getting a reach block and he's going to blow that tackle up because they're not used to dealing with someone that big and with that kind of length. So maybe, again, in terms of flexibility, like he's a good athlete. Yeah. He moves well. And so the idea that he could maybe move out, I think, is an interesting proposition as well. And again, come in on third down, rush the passer, all those things you want him to do. But again, like you talked about flexibility with those other players we talked about. But, I think that's something that I really can't wait to see is like, what do they think of his best use for him as a commander? Like, because maybe he does play a little bit of big end like Holmes did last year. And I actually like that idea for him because, again, it takes him out of those situations where he's got to read and react to all these different pulls and pins and different line movement. It's like, no, I've got a really simple read and I can be hyper aggressive here in terms of setting edges and being violent, which is where I think he's at his best. And I think his best when he's doing that, when he's at the pinnacle of what his physical frame lets him do, he's a pretty gosh darn good football player. Now it's just about making sure he can access that more frequently.
Do you remember, Seattle with Dan Quinn, the elephant lens that they used?
Yeah, absolutely.
And all that. And I know there was I can't remember who it was, maybe Chad Forbes, somebody put that out there like, hey, this is what Dan Quinn did there. Could you see him in that kind of a role?
I do, because I remember that being really effective for them. And now that player, I forget his name, Red Bryant. Yeah, he played like a true 6, but like as a tight end, that's a tough matchup, especially on first and second down. Like that's a physical matchup that you're like, oh man, I got to really eat my Wheaties and get after it today. And I think Kinlaw brings more athletic upside than a player like Red Bryant. Like Red Bryant was big, but he wasn't super athletic. Like Kinlaw, like there's times you see him running around, he just looks like a defensive end he looks like a defensive end, like create a player in Madden that's been blown up to a jumbo size. Like that's how he moves. So it seems like a much more natural fit for him. Again, Dan hasn't done that for a couple of years now, but I do think, obviously they did a little bit last year, but it'd be interesting. And I do think that's a really curious kind of position for him. And I think it'd be a nice fit for him if they chose to do that.
And last thing on him, because he's someone I'm intrigued by just simply because like I know what the film is showing, I know what people say, but I also know these guys know him well. And Daryl Tapp coached him in San Francisco, so there's clearly something they like and want
Yeah.
to tap. No pun intended, but want to tap into. But the other thing I'm wondering, as a pass rusher, tell me what you think of this, because like one thing I've noticed with him sometimes is that there's some maybe wasted energy on his rushes. Like the head movements and all that. That I wonder is could he be even more effective if you limit some of that stuff and just attack with your power and your quickness? Does that make sense? And did
Yeah,
you
I think
see
it does.
anything like that?
Yeah, I think, obviously you want to make every player more efficient. And that's something that's exciting for me because I think Daryl Tapp and Ryan Kerrigan did a great job of
Right.
making guys more efficient last year. And so I think if you're able to give him feedback and say, hey, like, this is your fastball, throw it. Throw your fastball. It's your best pitch, like, which is a power atomic bull rush. And then this is something you can do off of that. Because sometimes I feel like he's a little in between, So
Yeah,
like let's
maybe
eliminate some
that's
of
what I
that.
mean. Yeah.
Let's eliminate that. Let's be really decisive to our
Yeah.
fastball. And then hey, when the guy's doing this, now we can counter with a wiper, we can counter with a jab and inside move or whatever that is. I don't even know, but I'm saying like that's something that, again, I would also keep an eye on because you got to give a lot of credit to this coaching staff last year. I thought they did a great job of kind of identifying strengths and leaning into them. And so I think the staff's going to do that with Kinlaw, and that's an exciting proposition given how at times physically dominant he can be. Like he can be physically dominant at times. And if you can get that to increase by 25%, man, you got a live wire on your hands. So I'm really excited to see if they can get that done here.
And there were times too when I watch him with the Jets where I'm like, okay, he does his job. He's forcing this over here. He doesn't make the play, but the hard part for the Jets was there was nobody there to finish the play. So it's
Right.
like he does his job. It's like, you know what I mean? It's almost like an assistant basketball, right? Like, but the guy misses the shot. So he makes the pass, the guy missed shot. And there were a couple times like that where I saw that. I wasn't sure what to expect when I received my first order of Bird Dog shorts. I already had khaki shorts of similar colors, then I tried them on and realized I didn't have any shorts like Bird Dog's. I'll admit to being skeptical because the shorts have liners, and I've worn some shorts in the past with liners that were uncomfortable and the liners were too noticeable. But that wasn't the case with Bird Dog shorts. They're versatile. I wore them on a hike, I wore them to a ball game, I wore them when my wife and I went out to dinner. I also like their side pockets so you can put your wallet or phone on the side of your shorts, not in the back. If you're going golfing, there's room for tees or an extra golf ball on the side. For limited time, our listeners get a free hat with any order when you use the code word KEIM, K-E-I-M, at birddogs.com. Get this hat completely free when you use the code word KEIM, K-E-I-M, at birddogs.com. That's birddogs.com. Support our show and let them know that we sent you. When you look at all these moves, and obviously the talk is like, oh, they got to draft a defensive end. Do you feel now, knowing this group, that they have to take that position in the draft, especially with the first pick?
So I don't think they have to do anything. I think that's the beauty of what they've done in free agency. I think you could go into a game tomorrow and play a game with the people they have on the roster. And that's exactly what you want, right? We don't want to have to draft for need here in 2025. And I think they've done, Adam Peters deserves all the credit, right? He's done a great job of, trading for Laramie Tunsil, finding another explosive weapon in Deebo Samuels, getting good defensive line depth, finding a backup rotational corner in Jonathan Jones, finding a safety in Harris that's a really good physical player that fits what it means to be a commander. So I'm like, you could go into a game tomorrow and play a good football game. Now, to me, I think you want to upgrade in terms of talent, and kind of like Fred made this analogy. I think it's great. Now you want to add like the lettuce and the tomato on the sandwich, right? You got the meat, you got the bread, put the lettuce, tomato on there and get a little bit more athletic upside. So if you wanted to draft a defensive end at 29 that has some type of athletic upside, go for it. If you think he's going to add and fits the vision of the team, do it, right? And I think that's awesome because right now at 29, we don't have to draft, we don't have to draft Josh Connerly. We don't have to draft anybody because we've done these moves to support the team. So if there's a corner there you like, Javon Rebel, let's say from East Carolina, draft him. If Emeka Mbuka's there from Ohio State, he's your highest graded player, the receiver, draft him. Like that's what I think. That's how I think you should approach this process. And I think Adam's done that at a really high level. So when they say you have to draft a defensive end, I don't think so. Would it be nice? Sure. But it'd also be nice to get a true one wide receiver or another piece on the offensive line or a defensive tackle. Like they don't have to do anything, but now they can just add talent with those 5 picks in the draft.
And the other thing I'm curious too, if they went defensive end, like because of what they've added, they don't need an end to come right in and make this instant splash. They would almost fill a
Sure.
role. So it almost gives you some flexibility about like, okay, this guy maybe right now he's just a pass rusher, but we can develop him as a as an edge setter as well, but you can tap into that immediate thing he can do right now, whomever that would be.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think again, I think you were looking for kind of a pass rushing player. I think that's something that you want to kind of keep an eye on. And obviously, this is a really interesting class, like with Donovan Ezuraku or Nick Scordon or Landon Jackson in that kind of 29 type area. But I think again, like they don't have to come in and be everybody's hero right off the bat. They can kind of figure out their role and again be the third down pass rusher for a couple weeks, and then they get on first down and start playing a little bit more football. So I totally agree with that, and this is a good spot to be in. I think this is a great spot to be in. And then I also, if they don't draft an edge rusher, there's because this is such a deep edge rushing class, there's going to be guys, veterans that get cut in that kind of third wave of free agency post draft, like. And we found the Commanders found Charles Leno a couple of years ago, who was able to play some good football for 2 years. Maybe a veteran like that becomes available, and you're able to fill the need that way. So when people say you have to do something in the draft, I don't agree with that sentiment. Really, I think you got to do what trust your draft board, let the draft come to you, and get those accent pieces for the roster that you're looking for.
And my thing is always, it's funny, you talk to the GMs, everybody wants the best player available because that's how you build a good team. So, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you don't, when you just draft for need, you run into problems, but it's also the kind of draft where it may dovetail here. It's like, you know what? The best player is an edge rusher
Yeah.
because of the value of that position. Are there some that you really like that you've
Oh,
looked at?
absolutely. In terms of edge rushers, you're saying, yeah, there's a lot of guys. I think that's why this is such a fun year for the draft for me, is because like I really like Donovan as a Rocket from Boston College. I think he has a lot of pass rush juice upside. I love how Nick Scordon plays. He's a little bit of a bigger body defensive end, but is physically violent. And if you watch his Purdue tape from 2023, has 11 sacks, right? So has the sack production at A&M, not so much because kind of in a different scheme. Landon Jackson may be my favorite football player in the entire draft class because he just plays like every play is the last play he's going to play, which is a lot of fun for me to watch, right? You get the two guys from Ohio State. I like Tuimalau better than Jack Sawyer, but I might be in the minority there. And you got Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss. And so when I look at that, I'm like, those are 5 dudes, right? Who maybe not at 29, but kind of in that, I'd say 25 to 45 area that are going to be really good football players. So if you want to trade back, let's grab one of those guys. And then there's guys like Oladejo from UCLA,
Yeah.
who feels like more of like a third round player, but oh my gosh, does he play like a commander, man? Like watching him at the Senior Bowl, his leadership qualities, the physical violence he approaches the game with, like, so to me, like, I don't think there needs to be like this crazy or like doesn't need to be this crazy urgency to draft a defensive end, right? There's a lot of them, and there's a guy, and I think there's your flavor of defensive end, in terms of like we can get pass rush specialists, we can get a big guy, we can get guys that can have inside outside flexibility, like Jared Ivey from Ole Miss. Also, he's one of my favorite players to watch. Has 9 sacks last year at Ole Miss, but is 6'6", 285. So kind of that rush to the 3 technique, rush outside. So kind of whatever you're looking for. Let's get a good football player if you want a defensive lineman. I don't think it has to be at 29.
And Ken Norton knows the kid from UCLA pretty well.
So. I mean, that's a dude. He is, man. He is I don't know if you guys have watched him, but like Oladejo from UCLA, one of the most fun players to watch, man. Just he plays like Frankie Louvu, but he's bigger, and he just has that reckless kind of just love of the game, which is so infectious when you're watching film. You just kind of can't wait to watch the next play. So yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah, and I think you hit it too. When you're watching this now, we have a better idea of what kind of player they're looking for
Yeah.
too. And you can kind of shape that accordingly as far as like not just who you like, but who you think they will like as well and why.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that passion you talk about because they're going to love the dog, right? They want
Yeah.
that dog mentality, but also does he have versatility as well? And so, and what's that superpower? And there's a pass rusher, like what's the get off, the 10-yard split? All these guys that we've talked about, I believe, have a pretty good 10-yard split, which is important. So, but they all, so I think that's something to watch for as well. Offensively, with the signing of Tunsil, obviously, it does. It has sounded like Coleman would be going to right tackle. Nothing is official, so nobody has said that publicly. So, but what would be your ideal spot for him and why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You kind of brought this to my attention, the idea that he might be moving to right tackle as opposed to left guard, which I think if you look at his body type, he's got this tremendous length. He's got this great size. He's got the good height. He's like kind of a prototypical, tackle at the NFL level. And I think that's something that I hadn't thought about is maybe they really, really love him at tackle. Like, because again, I go back to my own bias. I had him as a guard and, right, wrong, and different. Like, that's what I thought he was going to be at the NFL level. So to see him play well at left tackle, solidly at left tackle last year, let's say, and, understanding kind of how they use their offensive lineman, I could easily see him going to right now that you've kind of brought that to my attention. So, again, yeah, like length, speed, movement skills, I think he'd be a heck of a right tackle, but I also think he'd be a heck of a guard. I think that's one of the things about drafting a guy with position flexibility the way they did, who's got the athletic upside that he does, is it lets you say, hey, who are our best five? Maybe you're in training camp and you're like, Allegretti goes to right while Cosme's out, Coleman goes to left, and then Wiley goes to right tackle. And that's what we do for a couple of weeks. And then Coleman kicks back out and Allegretti goes back and then Cosme's back. So I just love the flexibility that it gives you, that the move gives you. Because it really, like London Fletcher said this on our Command Center show the other day, it really is like adding two additions, right? You get better at two spots, which I think is really the fantastic thing about it.
That's what I like so much about the Tunsil trade is it was exactly that you move. It wasn't replacing a guy. It's now bumping a guy who's a young player that they like. And this kid Coleman can play in the NFL clearly. So that's where I kind of viewed it as well. Strengthens two spots, not just one. And Logan, it gives you that nucleus up front that I don't think they've had in a while. Like you can see this group playing together for 4 years.
And I think that's something that was really cool about the trade. And it was something we talked about during the free agency preview. It's like they needed to get an offensive lineman piece somewhere. And where was it going to be from? And so and this is why I felt so strongly about it, because now all of a sudden you've got Cosme, you've got Biotish, you've got a awesome left tackle, and then you've got a cornerstone young piece in Coleman. Like, it doesn't get much better than that. You know what I mean? In terms of, if you look around the league, people would be dying for that kind of rotation there. So it is a fantastic move. And again, it insulates your most valuable asset on your team, which is Jaden Daniels, right? It lets him be the best version of himself.
And it's funny too, because again, we talk about where Coleman might go. What we do know about the coaching staff is that they're huge on competition. And if he goes out there and Wiley still shows he's better, then you can put him somewhere else. And we don't know how that's going to shake out, but he will be somewhere on that front for sure. But I do, this is not a group that just gives somebody anything.
Right.
Now, of course, Tunsil is your left tackle, but like for Coleman, you're not going to just put him there. Okay, now let's go, and that's it, because I think they are very keen on that. And last thing then. The other move, well, we talked a little bit about, I don't know, maybe I haven't had in a while. So Deebo Samuel.
Yeah.
What will he add? And he and the Gallup signing as well.
Yeah. So I think with Deebo, I did a breakdown of him for the Command Center podcast, for the Command Center show, which airs on YouTube. So you go back and check that out. And I'm also going to post the breakdown to Instagram, so you guys can check out that Instagram too, Logan_Paulsen82. But the thing about him that I think is great is like, what he does with the football in his hands is special. Like, it's fun watching him with the ball in his hands. Like, his ability to maximize a 5-yard in route versus Philadelphia 2 years ago and take it 65 yards for a touchdown after breaking 2 tackles, or take a slammer screen, which looks like there's no air in it, read it out and go 45 yards for a touchdown in that same game is awesome, right? Take a bubble screen, break a tackle and go for 50. Like, all those things, all those plays I just described, they run here. Like, they run in Washington. They run them a lot. And so to get a guy who can maximize your quick game, maximize your RPOs, put you in the best position to, again, find explosive opportunities. Again, he's got to be healthy. He's got to be in shape. Those things are extremely important. But in the best world, in the best version of himself, like, he takes and raises the floor of this offense. Like, I think I might have been talking about this. Like, imagine, like, they had to go on 15, 16, 17 play drives a ton last year, because they couldn't consistently find explosive plays. Now you get a guy who can manufacture his own explosive plays in the context of the offense that you're already executing. You don't have to leverage Jaden Daniels any more than he's already leveraged because you got this piece that can get that done. So I think that's what makes me so excited about his role in the offense is that explosive playmaking contact balance that he brings that allows you to take a 5-yard gain and make it 20. And all of a sudden that 15 play drive is now 10, which is much more reasonable and much more consistent at the NFL level.
Last thing, what's the one thing left that you say, I hope they get a player at this spot or who can do this?
Yeah, I think, that's a really good question. So I think part of me is like, I'm really happy that they can do the best player available thing. I think that's going to be awesome for the team. But I still think I would agree. It'd be nice if they had a pass rushing defensive end, someone that could be a kind of game changing player in that role, a true outside corner. Like I mentioned, Ravel from East Carolina. Like if he were to fall for whatever reason, like that would be pretty fantastic at 29. I also think just maybe, and this is being kind of nitpicky, some running back depth, get some explosive playmaking ability there. And then some explosive playmaking ability at receiver, finding that true two. And again, you don't need that piece. It is a luxury at this point, right? Because of how well Jaden was able to elevate, Noah Brown, Zacchaeus, all these different pieces last year. But it'd be nice to get, hey, like we have a very solid offensive line. We have a 3-headed monster at receiver, and you just get a little bit more explosive in the offense generally. But I think those are some things that you kind of circle and say, in a perfect world, you'd like to get these addressed. But like I said, I don't feel like they need to do anything at the moment.
Logan, you know what's nice about all this? We didn't mention they need to find their quarterback. It's amazing how many years in a row that you could have just put that on, that was the first question. Who's the quarterback of the future?
Right.
This year? No. So I think we can take that off the list for a while. So anyways, Logan, anything else you need to plug coming up?
No, I mean, if you want more draft content, check out Ticket to the Draft on the Commanders podcast network, which is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Obviously, all the stuff I do with the team, please check that out. And that's it, man.
So the Take Command podcast with Craig.
With Craig.
Craig lets you get a word in once in a while.
Once in a while, that's right.
I love Craig. He's always good. Anyway, Logan, thanks a lot. You're the absolute best. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Monday talking to Ryan Porter, Jaden Daniels' personal quarterbacks coach. Be back on Monday. Talk to you next time.